future.
There are no people.
There are no people in the future.
No people at all.
There are no people in the future.
Where did all my people go?
There are no people in the future.
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Yes, the mic is now working. We are now streaming. Yes, indeed. It is Friday, November 10th, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. It's a special day. Yes, Election Roundup Week. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can help support this show, become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress today. And you can help out the show right now by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for the show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And yes, we just passed the 300 subscribers this week. Thank you, everybody, for the subscriptions. Thank you all for tuning in and your support. It's amazing. If you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on. Leave a comment to let us know why you like the show. Let other people know why you like the show. Little things like this help other people find the show and support the amazing work that the people that we bring on are doing. Well, today's show, yes, as I said, it's election week. This week I am joined once again by Cyril Mychalejko, the editor-in-chief of the Bucks County Beacon, and we're going to be breaking down, the election results from Tuesday. It was a huge day, I would say. Surprising, it was encouraging, lots of stuff to go through. We saw huge wins in school board elections and county offices across Bucks County. Both Pennridge and Central Bucks school boards flipped. There were significant wins in the state Supreme Court and other judicial elections. We'll get into it all today. And for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook. Wherever you get your streams, check him out and subscribe to his podcast wherever you get your podcast. Check out the ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. You've got to check out the latest Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, the amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind that podcast. Rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And of course, I know by now you've heard about The Signal. Of course you've heard about The Signal. The Signal is a new podcast from the Bucks County Beacon, not so new anymore. Almost wrapping up season 1, everybody. Pretty amazing. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Mychalejko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal shines a light on right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community toward calmer, saner, progressive roots. And if you haven't seen already, there's the new Gen Z hosted and focused podcast, The Civic Circle, from the Bucks County Beacon. You can get Civic Circle and the Bucks County Beacon by checking them out on wherever you get your podcast. Head it over to Podbean, head it over to Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcast, look for the Civic Circle, look for The Signal, and you are going to be in for a treat. And attention all you gamers out there, The Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, they've got you covered. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game In. That's with 2 N's, at The Game In on Twitter, or X. Special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan. That's with 2 N's, at SongADayMan on Twitter X. And if we want progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today. Become a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Simply go to patreon.com/rcpress. We're here for the fight and we need you. Become our patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement and the movement in the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, Cyril, welcome once again to the show. It's so great to have you on this Friday morning, bright and early.
Thanks, Kevin. Good talking to you too.
Well, let's just start here. Well, good morning to Emily. Emily has joined us. A bunch of other folks are joining the stream. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. We've got our coffee. I hope you've got yours. Cyril, I think it's fair to say that this was a huge week in Bucks County politics. This is elections, of course, were held on Tuesday, and the results were amazing. So I'm curious, just to kind of start us off here, what's your kind of takeaways, or what were your reactions following these elections, just as a kind of a broad strokes before we get into the specifics?
Sure. I mean, to be honest with you, I was shocked. Like I was cautiously optimistic that the Democrats would perform well, but I wasn't expecting this blue wave to come crashing across the county, and that's exactly what happened. From the county commissioner seats, from Pennridge school board races to Central Bucks, Council Rock as well. I think I was just obviously very happy. It's morning again in America.
Yeah.
Reagan campaign commercial once quipped. And I think Democrats and just voters in general are feeling, prouder, stronger, and better, a few days out of this election. And, I think what we saw was like people were voting for their hopes and not their fears.
Yeah.
And that's all the Republicans had to offer, is just fear, mudslinging, and disinformation. And the voters just rejected that.
Yeah, I mean, pretty handily too, as well. I mean, I was looking at the results countywide, and these were not a lot of these victories were not just 10 votes, 15 votes. They were pretty significant across the way. I've got to say, like you, I was cautiously optimistic. The one thing that, I've talked about, pretty repeatedly on my show is that, everything came down to the organizing work that was being done on the ground by community members and parents and teachers and students. And building these organizations from the ground up. And, like one of the things that we've, as long as I've been doing this podcast, I think we've always emphasized that the on-the-ground organization is really where the rubber meets the road. And when the community begins to organize on its own terms, and for what the community wants, the community wins, right? And this is what we saw. And, I know it's a cliche, but to say, they've got money, we've got people. And I think that bore itself out pretty significantly. So, and I think more, and that I think stands out no more better place than in Central Bucks, where Paul Martino dumped in something like $600,000 or something like this.
It was about $300,000.
$300,000.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, Central Bucks is a great example of how people power is greater than plutocrats and their money. And the voters sent Paul Martino a very clear message on Tuesday: democracy is not for sale. And so, like you said, the organizing on the ground, like, you have to tip your hat to, these parents and community members who, for at least the last year, if not longer, have been taking on the heavy lifting of grassroots community organizing, educating, mobilizing, really democracy building from the bottom up, which led to the Democrats just sweeping victory in the school board and a new Democratic board majority. And, in Central Bucks, these people were dragon slayers, right? Because Paul Martino was this MAGA dragon, this multimillionaire, this aspiring oligarch who, like we just mentioned, dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own cash into this race because, one, he wanted to buy a school board seat for his wife. And then two, and more importantly, he just wanted to consolidate an extremist majority with his hand-picked MAGA Moms for Liberty-backed candidates. And his mistake, I think, was that he used this money for essentially a scorched earth campaign.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, he drops $40,000 in seed money to some out-of-state GOP political hack to start a PAC. And this guy tells the Philadelphia Inquirer that by the time he's finished with his, toxic mudslinging and disinformation, and what I'd really call like a psyops campaign on the community, is that when he's done with this, the 5 Democratic candidates will, quote, be ashamed to be seen in public. Like, what kind of sick person says something like that, and then, for a school board election,
Yeah.
right? And so, for Martino and the Republicans who are like putting up these like nasty, just vicious, never mind untrue signs, it didn't matter if they burned the community to the ground. All that mattered was that they must capture power no matter what they had to do. But thankfully they lost, right? The community said thanks, but no thanks. We don't want any part of this. And that's why the defeat that the Democrats gave to Paul Martino was so crushing.
Yeah.
Right. But sadly, I don't think he learned anything. He didn't learn the message that voters tried to tell him. He said he's already gearing up for 2025. Right. And then, like, his wife just posted, Arthi, who was a candidate, she just posted some quote unquote letter to former WHYY journalist Emily Rizzo, essentially blaming her for their election loss. So, from what I see, they're just kind of like really stewing in this crushing defeat that they suffered and just stewing in their politics of grievance and resentment. And, unfortunately, I think that we're going to kind of see that expressed in school board meetings. And, that's going to be a challenge, one of the challenges for the new majority, kind of like dealing with this backlash that they're definitely going to take. And then 2, just, showing the community that you can govern in a more transparent and inclusive way. Although, with the 3 Republicans left on the school board, Sissio, who was Moms for Liberty, Pepper, who has anger issues and can't help himself but like scream at Karen Smith, and Deborah Cannon, who thinks that there's actual demons in our community trying to like corrupt everything. That's going to be tricky, I suspect.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's going to be tricky, but nonetheless, once given the significance of their wins, right? What's pretty amazing is they can set a whole different tone. Because you think about it, the difference between being the minority and trying to kind of be reasonable and govern the way that you should for a school board, right? Then versus being in the minority is like, now you've got the crazies are the ones are going to be consistently disruptive. Right. And, I think the community is not going to just, turn away and walk away and think the job is done now. I think if one thing that's, people have been disabused of that idea that you can just have one election and it's going to solve all the problems and then you can all just walk away. But I think the community is incredibly engaged at this point. And the fact that, to your point there about going after Martino, I mean, if you look at, his wife, like Arati got this, second like lowest vote totals, right, of all those school boards. So I think that was even like a double message, right, that we do not want your kind of vitriol in our community.
Yeah, and the voters decided that Rick Herring was just better qualified and better suited to represent the community, and then that's not even under dispute anymore. That's just a fact. But yeah, and it's going to be nice to see like a different tone in these meetings. Since we're always kind of like watching them and reporting on them, but if you think back. The Republican majority and the way that outgoing school board president Dana Hunter ran the meetings, I mean, all it was about attacking the 3 Democratic minority members and then not even letting them speak,
Right.
like not even letting them have like a debate and just kind of like raise their points, which they were trying to do civilly, based on their like expertise and, years of experience by like someone like Tabitha Delangelo, right? who's probably forgotten more education than a lot of these people will ever even know. So, that I think that victory was huge. This was a race that was being followed across the country. Also, like in your neck of the woods in Pennridge.
Yeah, exactly. Before we talk about Pennridge, Chuck just commented that Martino is on Twitter now blaming Act 77 for their loss. So he's looking for who to blame and wherever you can find it. Like looking for any target where you think something will stick. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he just needs to look in the mirror,
right?
And then he can figure out who's to blame for his loss.
Yeah, so I suppose Act 77 is responsible for the failure of his bankroll restaurant down in Philadelphia too, as well, right? So I'm sure somebody else is to blame. It's never him, right? He's never to blame. It's always other people because he's a perennial victim, even though he victimizes the community.
He thinks he's the smartest person in the room as well, right? So
yeah,
his
100%.
ego just won't let him kind of self-reflect.
100%. So Pennridge, right? So, I mean, this is my district. This is my school district where my kids go to school here. As anybody who listens to the show knows, because I've been pulling my hair out, what little of it's left, about what's going on here. And, in some ways, up until very recently, with the exception of the Beacon, really, and Emily Rizzo, before Emily Rizzo was, I don't know, taken off the beat, wasn't kind of reporting on whatever it might be. But, Emily Rizzo was one of the few other reporters that was paying attention to what was happening in Pennridge, too, as well. But Pennridge was, in some senses, more extreme in its attempts to systematically write over the curriculum with this Christian nationalist kind of agenda. And it flew under the radar in part because it doesn't have the same kind of, like oomph of some place like Central Bucks, because, Central Bucks, third largest in the district, fairly wealthy district, like for the most part. But it was an amazing turnout by the community, doing door knocking, doing the hard work. I want to read this as Adam Bensick said this one point. He said, the amount of time and effort put in this campaign by Kevin Foster, Emily Goebel-Smith, and Dawn Curran should not be overlooked. They volunteered and ran a type of professional operation that others get paid big bucks for in other races. Absolutely. And to Adam, too, as well, who has always been there. To Tina, who's always been there, kind of just like, knocking doors, building the organization, and never giving up. But I think everyone knew it was a pretty heavy lift, even though they did amazing work. And to see a complete sweep of the Pennridge School Board as a rejection of the Vermillion contract with Jordan Adams and of that kind of Christian nationalist agenda, it was just, I think, astounding.
No, absolutely. And I would just kind of like add like the Ridge Network,
100%.
Lauren Bradley, and just all the people who kind of, every month just made sure that they turned out to these school board meetings to kind of raise the issues that, other media wasn't reporting on. And a big shout out, of course, to Darren Lausson, who took the district to task and kind of exposed what, in my opinion, was kind of like a shadow book banning operation. And when he took the district to court, the judge ruled in his favor. So Darren had been, as readers of the Beacon will know, Darren had filed RTKs because he was noticing that these books at first were kind of like being checked out for a year. Titles that were being targeted by Moms for Liberty, and then eventually kind of like getting weeded out of the library system. And after the district, under the Republican school board's leadership, decided to stonewall him, with these RTK requests, with the information that as a citizen and taxpayer of Pennridge, he had the right to have access to. He took him to court, and the judge ruled that the district, one, acted in bad faith, and two, participated in what amounted to a cover-up.
Right.
And so, that's just another kind of issue that I think really did not reflect well on this Republican leadership in the school district. As well as for those of us who, tune into these meetings or go to these meetings every month, I mean, just the dysfunction of that school board, the infighting between Republicans, right? There was only one Democrat on the board, and that was someone who switched parties because he decided, holy crap, the Republican Party is just too crazy for me now. And just that the infighting between the Republicans, and then just the disdain for transparency and accountability, it turned off obviously moderate Republicans in the school district, because Pennridge is a majority Republican area.
Yes.
That needs to be highlighted. Like, this was shocking. I fell off my seat when I saw those results came in. I could not believe it. And let me tell you that the folks dodged an extremist bullet, because had the Republicans just kind of consolidated power, they would have viewed that as just, approval by the community to just kind of push even further with their kind of right-wing extremist makeover, of the district. But instead, what voters actually did is voters in Pennridge School District gave Democrats a mandate for change, and they need to use that mandate and move the school district into a direction that places public education over partisan politics, and common sense over extremism.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the, I was just looking for the quote from which one it came from, but one of the articles I was reporting on that, he basically said, okay, the fox is getting kicked out of the hen house now, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is Jordan Adams famously said at the Moms for Liberty Summit down in Philadelphia that, hey, the fox is in the hen house, and we know that because of the Beacon, but the Beacon, who actually got recordings of his presentation and published a transcript of what he said to people thinking that he was not, he was talking among friends. And we got to know that this is exactly what he was planning. He said, hey, look, the fox is in the hen house now. And so this is something the community said, nope, we're kicking the fox out as a first order of business, right? So, and I think they're going to use that. The one thing I will say, though, about the, what you kind of mentioned, Pennridge is, it's a majority Republican district, right? If you look at just their voter registrations and things like this, right? One of the things that I will give so much credit to all of the candidates who ran that race is they were extraordinarily clear that this is about the community, right? And they defined themselves. It wasn't they didn't just kind of do reactionary, okay, they're the Republicans and we're the Democrats. They branded on together the Pennridge Community Alliance, and that's how they campaigned, right? And there's a reason that they got, I mean, I think, formally what people would understand as to be Republicans, like your dad's Republican Party, as they would always say, right? That were kind of more moderate, would always vote Republican and so on, but they got people to listen, right? And I think what you say, you credit Darren Lawson for his lawsuit. I think what everyone began to see pretty clearly is it wasn't partisan politics, right? Is what it was. It was a wholesale assault on our school district. Right. And then this is the community standing up and saying, we cannot allow this to happen. Right. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And so what they did, what the Pennridge Community Alliance did was that they actually ran on the issues.
Yes.
While the other side was trying to say, oh, the Democrats want to make your kids trans. Right. That. So again, people voted for their hopes rather than for these delusional fears, and voters voted on the issues and the policies and the policy changes and critiques that the Democrats ran on.
100%. So, I mean, and congratulations right across the board. And this, we have to say, and I look, I don't have evidence for this, right? So I want to be clear about this here, but I have to believe that the fight that was taking place in Pennridge, the fight that took place in Central Bucks, was extraordinarily helpful in alerting to other school districts about what was going on in the area, because we also saw victories in school boards that were not kind of on the kind of number one, like, you know, right out in front of the radar in terms of spotlighted in terms of national news and so on. For example, Council Rock. I mean, Council Rock was extraordinarily concerned that they were going to be the next Pennridge, and they were going to be the next Central Bucks. There was like an editorial in the Beacon about this, and they won handily.
Yeah, I mean, you know, unlike Pennridge and Central Bucks, you know, Moms for Liberty, they didn't make their way into the school board yet, but they were kind of like knocking on the door, trying to get in. And so again, like, you know, the Democratic candidates in Council Rock, what they did was what you know, folks in Central Bucks and Pennridge did. They just put together just an army of volunteers, huge numbers, you know, over 100 volunteers, just kind of really dedicated to kind of knocking on doors, helping raise funds, you know, learning about and educating about the issues. And that was a pretty, again, like Council Rock was just like Central Bucks and just like Pennridge, was just a huge victory. And you know, those three districts sent a message to folks, you know, to Moms for Liberty in Bucks County and across the country, is that, you know, your toxic reactionary politics are not wanted, not needed, and not welcome in school, in public education.
100%. And, you know, WFMZ did a great article on this too as well, pointing out that, look, they are also, Moms for Liberty basically were kept out of the kind of Southern Lehigh school district, right? They were kind of kept out of, which is incredible, the Perkiomen school district, right? They were kind of kept out of there. Great pushback. I mean, every day when I was driving to work, I'd have to go by the signs in Southern Lehigh, and, you know, the true Republicans. And it was the agenda that we saw kind of assault Central Bucks and Central and Pennridge, and to see that kind of push back, so they were kept out of the district, is incredible. Now, we should also say that, you know, all the more reason why it's, you know, these organizations that were able to successfully beat back the Moms for Liberty crew from taking over the school districts, it's a good opportunity now to reach out to some of those school districts who are not as lucky. Right. So we saw, for example, Souderton area school district saw losses. Right. We saw some of the extremists take over there. In the Kutztown area school district, we saw, again, some of the extremists that take over there. They now have a 6-3 majority. There's, you know, other school districts that did not have the kind of the length of time organizing ahead of it. Right. Are now kind of are going to need help, right? And that's going to be, you know, part of it's going to be on us, is to make sure that we have a spotlight that it's on these folks and can support them, and then also opportunities to connect up people in the community who've done this organizing that could help out other folks, and to broaden this coalition ahead of the 2024 elections too as well.
No, I think we've mentioned this a few times before, but you know, I would love to see some kind of local summit for, you know, folks and representatives of the communities of these different school districts, kind of like come together to kind of share strategy and vision and, you know, stories about what they think they did right, what maybe didn't work out so well, or what could be done better. You know, I think like we need to kind of do now some of the larger kind of like, you know, umbrella type organizing. And, you know, it could start in Bucks County and then even kind of turn into some kind of like statewide summit, because, you know, like we mentioned before, they're not going to go, you know, gently into the night, right? You know, Paul Martino's already gearing up for 2025. I'm sure he's going to double down, spend even more money. You know, the dark money and the you know, the conservative ideologues behind Moms for Liberty, you know, they're not going to give up. They've been playing the long game for decades, right? And so we need to kind of, one, like, you know, take a breath, right? Because I'm sure, like, you know, folks are exhausted. the community members that were just kind of doing this hard work day in and day out, every week for the last year or two. But, here's the thing. Democracy is a verb, right? And it needs to be used in the active voice. And it's something that we need to participate in every day in order to combat, the wannabe oligarchs like the Jeffrey Yasses and the Paul Martinos, who look at democracy as a thing that they want to buy. And so we need to just kind of regroup, re-energize, and then just get going again. Because obviously next year is going to be a huge election, not just locally, but for the entire country.
100%. And, you remind me, it's like I'm reading this book right now, which is Mike Gambone's got a great interview or review of this book in the Bucks County Beacon. It's Naomi Klein's new book, Doppelganger. And it's a fabulous book. And there's a chapter in there where she's talking about, in part because of COVID, but also because of, say, right-wing and kind of neoliberal politics and things like this, the birth of this kind of wellness industry, which is always about focusing just on the me, right? Making my body as healthy as possible, making this. And I think that your point there about democracy is just like we exercise to keep ourselves healthy, right? This is kind of like a wellness program for democracy, right? Is the exercising of meeting people in the community about, talking about issues together and how we solve problems collectively and collaboratively, how we do the work of door knocking, how we do the work of reaching out and talking to people and finding out what matters to them, outside of just kind of like bombarding the airways with kind of like big money advertising. So, I think it's I really like that idea. To have this idea of, we need a wellness program for democracy. It's pretty straightforward. One of the things Kimberly says, a couple things here, and I think this is a good segue to talk, just to do a little overview of some of the other election results. Kimberly says this is the first ever Democratic majority in Doylestown Township. And I think that's 100%. We saw this, the wins you already mentioned, the county commissioner's office. But this blue wave was pretty significant, both in Bucks County and what we saw in the victories there, and then even statewide in terms of making sure that, for example, abortion rights are protected at the state level, right, both through the Supreme Court. So, are there some highlights that you want to kind of focus in on there that you think would be useful to point to?
Sure. One, I think it's important to highlight that this was a loss for Brian Fitzpatrick as well. He's someone that came out to support these right-wing MAGA Moms for Liberty backed school board candidates. He endorsed at least three: one, Josh Hogan; two, Arthie Martino; and then three, Stephen Mass. All of them on the far right of the spectrum, and they just got drugged. And I don't think, I'm hopeful that this kind of is sending a message that, his kind of like sway over the community is kind of waning. And I think this maybe opens him up to at least an election fight next year. I think maybe he was trying to kind of like double down on his MAGA bona fides because he's afraid of his primary challenger, was it Mark Houck, coming from his right. Mm-hmm. And then given like Brian Fitzpatrick's anti-abortion stance as well, I think this leaves him vulnerable. Never mind his votes for both Jim Jordan, who he voted for twice, as well as the new kind of like Christian nationalist Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, Fitzpatrick, by going, I think that, let me back up a little bit. I think this has been a test plan, if you will, for how Republicans can maintain minority rule, right? And the idea was if you can gin up the base at the school board level, right? And have this kind of, you always talk about down ballot stuff, right? But there's been some discussion now, like, well, look at the up ballot impacts of these school board races. And I think that was one of the, it's pretty much a national strategy. There's a reason why money started flowing into Moms for Liberty when they first started getting out in Florida, for example. Why in Pennsylvania, one of the key states for coming up in the 2024 election, saw this as the second largest Moms for Liberty chapter in the country, right? So, I mean, all those things are there. And I think they were banking on that, rile up the base, right? And then that's going to have kind of up ballot impacts. And instead, so Fitzpatrick jumped on that train. He's got pictures of himself posing with like Josh Hogan. He's got pictures of himself posing with the extremist candidates in Central Bucks. And now those are going to be on campaign literature as he goes to get reelected.
Absolutely. I mean, so yeah, and I think another one, I just want to kind of like give a shout out before I forget to the community members and to the Bucks County Beacon writers and the community members who've kind of written posts for us, whether it's like David O'Donnell and Pennridge, Darren in Pennridge, Layla Casey, who is just really on top of everything that is going on in Central Bucks. Jenny Stevens for her tireless reporting on what's happening in Pennridge. I really think that kind of like made a difference, especially when you see that the Courier really and the Intelligencer haven't been covering really anything.
No.
Right. And that's just like, it's so dangerous to democracy. I mean, it's such like an epic failure of journalism on Gannett and USA Today's part because they're the owners of the Courier. I mean, the Courier didn't even report on Darren's victory at the
court.
Was
astounding. It was astounding at their lack of kind of attention to what the hell's going on in the community.
Yeah, how do you not cover that? And so like, and that's like an important issue for voters to know, right? And so because like the Courier is kind of failing in its responsibility to inform the electorate, you run the risk of having like low IQ voters, like political IQ, low electoral IQ voters, because they're just not getting the information that's necessary in order to, make informed and rational decisions about local governance, whether it's a school board or the county commissioner's race. And so, and then obviously like kind of like what you are doing, like independent progressive media is kind of like, it's one of the antidotes, right, to the kind of like viral far right extremism that's trying to kind of like infect our communities. So support progressive independent media.
I was just about to say, head on over to buckscountybeacon.com/support the beacon, or just go to buckscountybeacon.com and hit the little support the beacon tab right at the top. You can become a sustaining member as little as $5 a month. Get on over there and support it. Because the beacon, I mean, I've said this on my show, independently of when you're on the show, is that, I really do think the beacon has become the kind of locus point, the center, the hub of the wheel, so to speak, about how we can build out the kind of coverage that you're talking about. And ideally, we'd all love it if the Courier Times was decided to actually devote its reporting and actually do that work, but they're not, right? I mean, the Penn Live, right, Harrisburg-based newspaper gave more coverage to Darren Lawson's lawsuit than the Courier Times did, right? I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. So, just like Paul Martinez gearing up for 2025, well, so is the Bucks County Beacon, right? 100%. And we have plans and goals to kind of expand what we're already doing, but we do need your support to make that happen. Sorry, I went off.
No. I actually literally had brought up the fundraising page because I'm like, I want to make sure I'm going to plug this right now while we're talking about it, because it's just so important. I mean, I can't think of something that's more, more critical right now to make sure that we have spaces ideally where we can focus on those issues that matter in the community in a sustained way. I mean, and I think what we said is important is it's not to say that the Bucks County Beacon or any independent media is like the end all be all answer to things. That's not the point. The point is that a healthy, vibrant democratic culture, right, has a lot of things that are necessary for it to thrive. And one of them is an independent, like pull no punches media, right? That's actually going to report on the things that community is doing. The other is, spaces where people are learning how to talk to people, how to campaign, what's kind of, the nitty gritty of politics, how to run for office, right? Where to meet in social spaces in order to kind of exchange things, to talk with each other about kind of what's important. All that stuff matters. And then once we start taking away particular legs of that stool of democracy, right, it's going to eventually fail. So this is, I don't know. I tell everybody I can. I talk to everybody I can about Bucks County Beacon, as that, in a sense, a shorthand for this is the kind of work that we need to be doing and exercising for democracy. So buckscountybeacon.com/support the Beacon. Please do support them if you can. So sorry to make this a commercial in the middle of the thing, but it really is. I mean, I can't. Obviously I've been working in this space for, quite some time. And so I'm committed to this being, part of the key aspects of building social movements, supporting democracy and so on. And the fact that I'm living at a time when you got a place like the Bucks County Beacon emerging is pretty, it feels heartening to me. That's all.
Okay, so let's get back to the blue wave that kind of like doused the fire that was set by the political arsonists like Paul Martino and Jeffrey Adams.
100%.
Right? So I think we should be like proud of like what happened in Bucks County, but let's not kind of like get too full of ourselves and get complacent. And like I said, it's important to kind of like double down heading into 2024. But I think this kind of like positions ourselves in a good space. And I think really that the energy that was going into the election and now after the kind of like sweeping victory is something that we can kind of like build on heading into next year.
100%. And I think that, I'm going to lay this out as here's my concern going forward. I'm not making a claim that this is going to happen, but it is my concern because I've, seen this stuff happen in the past. And I talked to Cyril a little bit about this before the show today is that, I've been listening to a lot of the national reporting, right? Even some of the kind of regional reporting in the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Times and stuff, also on cable news, also on NPR. My concern is that there's a media narrative that's emerging because it's, this is the national parties are invested in this narrative, is that it's like the Democrats won, right? The Democrats had this big blue wave. And yes, they were Democrats who won, but I don't believe that automatically translates into like, the brand of the Democratic Party, if you will. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that my concern is that these Democratic Party consultants who have messed up elections in the past because they come with this, belief about what national politics is, right? And that there's like a thing in the air about Democrats winning. I don't believe that's what it is. I think it's number one, it's got to start with looking back for the people that worked to deal after January 6th, about the women who have been fighting since the Women's March, right? And the organizing that took place in the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? Of the community members who have been organizing around school board elections to beat back the assault on the democracy. It's that kind of organization, right? That ground up stuff that I believe, that's where the hope is. And so, I'm always just extraordinarily conscious about how we're going to be talking about the elections coming up in 2024 as not team sports, right? I mean, we're going to talk about the need, going back to what you said, focusing on the issues that matter and are critical to people, right? Rather than kind of like, like red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. We're going to talk about those candidates that are going to basically defending women's right to abortion. We're going to be talking about those folks who are going to kind of support like a full like revitalization of democracy, of protecting our kind of elections and starting with what's happening on the ground.
Do you think that this election kind of signaled that maybe the Republican, at least some Republicans, or maybe there's a growing number of Republicans that are kind of, finally kind of getting turned off by the authoritarian kind of extremist models of politics that Donald Trump helped kind of like grow within the party, because it's a MAGA party now, and I've always disagreed with Republicans, but it's just like what we've seen in like Bucks County with like the growing extremism, and even Pat Paprick was an election denier and fake fake elector, but she is in like kind of like a civil war within the Republican Party because someone even farther to the right of her, Andy Meehan, thinks like, his part of the grassroots should be leading the party. But, does what happened in Doylestown and Central Bucks, because Doylestown's also red as well.
Yes.
Right. It's not as red as Pennridge. It's not as dark red as Pennridge, but that the Democrats won in a Republican majority school district.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a really good point, and I think, look, the way that I think has been a failure of going back, we talked about democratic culture, right? Is that we've get into, say, team sports stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And and again, it's like, how long do you support your team until you personally just can't stand it anymore? Right. You begrudgingly support it. And the thing is like the struggle for, I think, on the Republican side of things, and I don't mean just at the leadership level, but I mean among kind of Republicans as a whole, they want to win. Right. And there's been this kind of will to power in the Republican Party for quite some time. Right. And it's been pretty kind of cutthroat about, they'll do what they can to kind of win. But what we just saw, I believe at least, is that there's a chunk of those stalwart Republicans, right, who just felt it at the local level and watched their own community now being disrupted to the point where they had to make a choice, right? The fact is that, can I continue to hide behind, I'm a Republican, right? I have to make a choice between what's happening down the road in my schools and my allegiance to my team. Right. And so I think that's what we saw starting to fray. Right. And this is also true at the national level. Right. Is like we hear all the time, like, well, behind the scenes and off camera, they say that they can't believe what's going on, but they still vote. They still vote for the extremist politics. What I think that why the organizing is so important, why the door knocking was so important, is that you're beginning to drive a wedge there. Right. About those folks are having to kind of consider themselves not just as a fan of this team, but as a part of a community. And being a part of the community is at odds with being a supporter of that team. So,
I mean, do you think that could translate into presidential politics?
If the organizing remains at the local level, I think if I think an expansion of the kind of things that we saw at the school board and community level, I think is what's important, is because, I don't think, look, I mean, I'm a realist about this stuff, right? I mean, I understand that that's a heavy lift. It's not just going to happen overnight. I mean, it took like 3 cycles of school board elections before you had a strong enough organization to beat back the extremism, right? So let's be clear. So some level, it's going to be that national messaging. The question is, I think it's going to be important for the people who have done this organizing and won to push back against both regional, like countywide, statewide, and national, say, Democratic Party leadership, for example, and insist that they hear that the messaging needs to grow from the bottom, right? Yeah. That these national, I think there are some exceptions there. Abortion is critical because that is on the table. That is legitimately on the table about a national abortion ban if Republicans take over kind of nationally. Absolutely. That will affect what happens with Fitzpatrick. But that's not something that is like emerged at the national level and is being forced down locally. That affects everybody, and people are already organizing on that. So that's critical. And remember how long it took to push the Democratic Party, right, when they're campaigning, even in Bucks County and locally, to say the word abortion, right? Instead of saying like women's reproductive care. No, we need to stand for protection for abortion rights, right? So, I mean, I think like that's the kind of thing that's going to be critical. The fact that we saw, for example, a similar kind of beating back of Moms for Liberty in Iowa, right, that got all sorts of national splash. That's important right? Because you're seeing that organizing is happening nationally too as well. And I think there are those within the Democratic Party, say leadership, that are really starting to toy with the idea that maybe they need to move away from the consultant class, right? And move back towards building party, party organization at the kind of state and regional level. And the more we can help that along, the better. I mean, I think like organizations like the Ridge Network are going to be actually critical. Organizations like, that we see Kadita Kenner, right, kind of basically pushing for this stuff at the statewide level, that's going to be absolutely critical. And the more we can support project. Them. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Sorry to go on. I'm a little tirade cool. here, but yeah.
The New Pennsylvania Project in Central Bucks, like advocates for inclusive education, like their sole focus was, and was nonpartisan, was just to educate the community about the issues that the district was facing. And you're right, that does need to happen. And then, like you said, it's quite a relief that the hood finally got ripped off Moms for Liberty, and people see them for what they really are, And so that brand is just toxic now.
Yep.
And that's why we saw people running away from their endorsements, right? Like going back to like Council Rock, the candidates asked Moms for Liberty not to publicly endorse them after they filled out their questionnaires. Yep. And then like Martino and he tried to run away from the fact that Moms for Liberty, on their website made a little meme saying like, these are the candidates that you need to vote for in the election. So we'll see how, if they're able to bounce back, but it would be nice to kind of, watch them kind of like fade into obscurity.
100%. And, I'm just reminded of, when Diana Lagerman was on my show a while back. This is like her first, first run at, on the school board and things like this. One of the things that she said, right when CRT and one of the things, all the, these cultural warrior stuff started emerging in the school boards, is that one of the things she said is that, in the community, like she was running, candidates were running, and they were running, wanted to push back against, the anti-maskers, against the CRT kind of group, it's the anti-white people kind of coming in. One of the things that she said is that, they were getting their campaigns going. They wanted to respond to that. And they had Democratic Party consultants were basically saying to them, don't do that. Ignore them and they'll go away. Right. And the message, or my takeaway from talking to her and seeing what's happening in the community is like, okay, you can listen to, to hear what they got to say, but trust yourself, trust your community, and trust each other in terms of building that back, because you can push back against those people. Because like, look, when these Democratic Party operatives come in and they want to kind of help kind of elect, Ahas coming up against Fitzpatrick and so on, right? They're going to be, kind of be organizing too as well. But the community better than they do, right? And so you get to push back against them and say, no, this is how we need to build our campaign because we did it already and we won. So,
one thing I just wanted to mention that I just remembered was in Central Bucks, the three remaining Republicans on the school board were the Republicans that were endorsed by the militia, the Proud American Patriots Network.
Oh my God.
So that's who's representing the Republicans heading into 2025.
That's one hell of a brand identity that got going on there then, huh?
Yeah.
Crazy. Well, Cyril, this has been quite an incredible week. And so on. Anything else you think we should touch on, right, in this election kind of wrap up? I mean, I think that, the county commissioner stuff I thought was absolutely amazing, that we saw that. Like Kimberly said, that we saw the wins in Doylestown Township. We saw right across all the row offices, or, the clerk offices of the county were won by Democrats. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I guess another thing people can celebrate was that Bucks County's other MAGA millionaire, Jim Worthington, he was pushing his followers to vote against Ellen Snyder in Newtown Township, and she won handily. So he's on quite a losing streak with, with Trump supposedly, quote unquote, supposedly losing, Herschel Walker, New Jersey's Dr. Oz, and now the Newtown Township supervisor. So it was nice to see that. It's nice to see like his and Martino's influence just really waning.
So I guess the way to kind of close out today's discussion in some ways, I mean, if anybody's listening in today has additional kind of questions or comments you want to think we should air out, things that we didn't talk about, you think we should, just drop it into comments as you listen. But so the question now is like thinking forward, right? For this next round of elections, we have the presidential election. There's a lot at stake. What's going on? How are you thinking about this upcoming election season?
I mean, it's the threat of another Trump presidency. It's just that the idea of it is horrifying because they're already planning to kind of like gut the federal government and just kind of really dismantle the democratic safeguards that we have in these institutions. I think I read, maybe it was in the Washington Post, they're even like floating around the idea of like invoking the Insurrection Act if he wins, if there's like, protests, against his presidency. So again, like I take nothing for granted. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we're heading into 2024 with a blank slate, because you can't take anything for granted. And the whole idea that Trump won in the first place, after everything that was exposed by him, and just like the horrible things that he said about, sexually assaulting women and kind of like thinking that that's okay, that's his right. It just, voters are hard to understand, right? And so, I think like what we've been kind of like the drum we've been banging during this, during this conversation is just the correct one. It's just community organizing from the bottom up, right? That's the way to move forward, and to remember that like, democracy is kind of like a full-time job. I mean, it's tough because, you want to have a life, and you're working and,
right,
taking care of your loved ones and kids. But where 2024 is a critical election. And while I think President Biden has had a successful first term, there's this narrative that the media keeps banging about his age, even though they don't apply it to Trump, that, I think raises concerns with some people. It just does,
yes.
Right? He's not the same person he was in 2016 or 2020 for that matter. And that affects like people's perceptions. And unfortunately kind of like steers them away from, his record of accomplishments. I would say he's governed more progressively than Obama.
Oh, totally. 100%. Yep.
And his programs are popular, right? Like they're very popular. So, I don't know. I mean, where do you stand, about him? Like, at first I thought it was perfect, like when he was talking about being like a one-term bridge president. I believe he when he was running last time, he initially intimated that,
yes,
that was what he intended, or at least was like a strong possibility. And I feel like the Democrats have a good bench too, like Whitmer in Michigan. I think she's done a phenomenal job there. Yeah. Watching Gavin Newsom just kind of like take Sean Hannity to task, on very hostile show, and he pretty much owned him just by, just because he's such an effective communicator, and was just able to kind of like, rely on facts over the far right fictions that Hannity was vomiting. I think that the Democrats are in a position where, like, on the national leadership stage, I think they can do very well, but it almost feels like they're afraid, right? Like, how is it that Biden's the only person that can beat Trump? And I'm not saying like he shouldn't run. I'm saying maybe he shouldn't. But how do you? I mean, that's something I can't wrap my head around. Like, why do they think he's the only person that can beat this just like wannabe authoritarian?
I think the fear, what you just said about them being afraid, is really the closest answer to that. I remember like Edward Bernays, right, who was like, considered the, self-appointed like godfather of public relations, right, writing in the 1920s and stuff, wrote books on propaganda and public relations and all this stuff. Is that I'm going to get the exact wording wrong, but it was basically at the very beginning of that book when he's saying, what do you try to do with say public persuasion? And his thing was like, he talked about something like the oppressive weight of tradition or something like this. And his analysis, I thought, was really, was an important one, because he was talking about institutions and the way people have done things, right, is its own weight, right, and carries with it its own kind of like, inertia. And while I disagree with a lot of what Bernays said about what you do with that, it nonetheless is true of some places like institutions. And I think the Democratic Party for so long has operated on this, seniority model, right? Which is, that's how you get to be a leader in the Democratic Party, is you stay there a long time, right? You're the next one up, right? You're the one that is due, you've paid your dues and now it's your turn. And there's a legacy to that. And, there's Biden is this really, I think, like a hinge figure in some ways. Like, so much of his career was rooted in that kind of old school Clintonian kind of neoliberal framework that the Democrats, embraced because they got so afraid after, some electoral losses and Reagan's win, that they think you have to sound like Republicans in order to win. So they have the one hand, but then you've got Biden coming in with that kind of history, that kind of, being at the center of the party type of stuff. But like you said, surprised the hell out of me when he came into office and proposed policies that were like better than I could have ever imagined that would be put down there by a sitting president. And we have to acknowledge that the only thing that stood in the way of those policies getting passed was people like Joe Manchin, right? The centrist Democrats, right? And, we could argue back and forth about whether or not, the Democrats really pushed hard enough behind these plans and got behind them enough. But I do think there's some fear there. So I think you think about the whole infrastructure that's around him, all the people that are hired in the cabinet, all the people that are support his campaigns, they're all urging him to stay in because, part of it's self-interest, but part of it is they're worried about a potential loss and how detrimental and devastating the next, Trump presidency could be. So, I was 100% behind. I think Biden should be a one-term president, right? And then they should like you said, go to the bench early, yeah. Right? My concern now is it's like Christmas, you know what I mean? Yeah. For all practical purposes, it's Christmas. And I don't know. I'm scared that I don't want to say scared. My concerns are things like, look, when people are old, right? They have more health issues. Right, that's true for Trump and for Biden, right? We have Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a standing example of what happens, right, when people are old. And she was in, by all stretches, all people said, like, she exercised every day, she was in good health, but things happen. So that's a concern. That's got me worried. But, I think that the Biden's strong embrace of the UAW strike and seeing what he's gone out over the celebration is going to do nothing but help him. and help that campaign going forward. If, unions can point to this and say, look, this is why we vote for this guy, right? To make some inroads back into those communities that were lost to Trump because they were sick and tired of these like free trade neoliberal policies and stuff. But anyways, you asked the question. There you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can kind of like hopefully I can come back on down the line and we can kind of like dig into the national politics. I do hope you have someone on to kind of talk about the UAW strike and the significance of that, because that's huge, and it kind of it to me at least it kind of signals maybe a new chapter for labor in the United States that kind of is a little bit more old school, a little bit more militant, and has a lot more fight in it.
Yeah, 100%. And believe me, I've got kind of my irons in the fire on that one. I've got a list of kind of upcoming shows that I want to kind of nail down for exactly this. Well, Cyril, I think Kimberly says it best here as a way to kind of transition out into our weekend. She says, thanks to the Bucks County Beacon and Out the Coop for fresh and forward reporting. Cyril was there 2 years ago when the extremists started to show their hand, and Moms for Liberty launched Bucks chapter in October 2021. Absolutely, which is why you need to be on the ground, and Cyril has been on the ground, and the Bucks County Beacon has been on the ground. So get on over there to buckscountybeacon.com, hit the support the Beacon button, and make sure you support them for as little as $5 a month. Cyril, thanks so much for coming on, man. And it's amazing to be able to close out such a monumental week.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kimberly. And then obviously thank you, Kevin, for having me on and just kind of like being such a big supporter and part of the Bucks County Beacon with your production of our podcast. So I appreciate it.
Well, here you go. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning out. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone who is kind of listening and will continue to listen. Thank you, Chuck, for tuning in kind of live today and kind of showing up in chat. 100% love it. Just want to say that, look, you can help support the show by heading over to patreon.com/rcpress. You can become a patron for as little as $5 a month. And make sure you go onto the Beacon, support the Beacon, as little as $5 a month. This is Kevin Mahoney. I'm out of here for the weekend. Whew, what a week. See ya!